If my name was Nintendo, I would be battening down the hatches and preparing my best things imaginable because of how good Palworld has been doing. After losing all of their lawsuits against Pocket Pair with Pokemon and Palworld, the future of this game is now brighter than a supernova. And the wins just keep coming, and it's pretty much official now. Nintendo can do nothing to stop Palworld's ascension, and it's all their fault. Honestly, this video is nothing but good news, I gotta be real, as Kid Guru shows here. Palworld's popularity is surging to ungodly superhuman levels now. This game is reaping all the benefits of what Nintendo has just forgotten to capitalize on, and at this point, Nintendo really can't do much against it. As seen here from about a day or so ago, Palworld has somehow reached almost 1 million players again on Steam alone, which is beyond ridiculous for a development studio of this size, but it's happening. As this user said on Twitter, if Nintendo could maybe get their heads out of their own cheeks, they could lock in and create something that could rival Palworld, but at this point, I'm not so sure. Of course, I'm not going to say Pokemon's going to fail. That's impossible. Pokemon is the largest IP in the world. If you can believe it, it's bigger than all of the Marvel characters, even DC, and then some combined. So no, Pokemon is not over by a long shot. That being said, though, Palworld's existence does prove one thing, that Nintendo needs to learn from this, and fast. The highest peak player count Palworld hit on Steam in the last 30 days was around 956,000 players, which is an increase in player count of around 733% compared to June last year. So this is Palworld's official second largest player count ever, besides when it, first released and hit over 2 million at that point, which is also when Nintendo took notice and then tried to eliminate them, but obviously they could not do that. The momentum of Palworld right now is borderline Super Saiyan at this point. The game is beyond anything that Pocket Pair could have imagined. Even if angry Nintendo players keep yelling and saying that Palworld rips off Pokemon's designs, it doesn't really seem to matter. Pokemon with guns, that's here to stay. And it is a genuine competitor too, because those numbers do not lie. You need to realize how crazy this all is. As Games.gg said here, only 3 games have crossed 2 million concurrent players on Steam. That's PUBG, Black Myth Wukong, and Palworld. That's it. It's a very small club up there. Even games like Cyberpunk 2077 or Monster Hunter Wilds, which were also big mega sellers too. They only managed around 1 million concurrent players at launch. And I say that as if that isn't also immensely impressive, which it is, don't get the wrong idea, but still. The fact that Palworld pretty much doubled Cyberpunk's player counts, and that game was so hyped up, that's astounding. For starters, Palworld now has a coherent, fully built main campaign that flows from its story beats into the next. The world tree's been added, all the factions in the game have greater emphasis as well. There's also Sunreach. That's a new part of the game's open world map. It's a bunch of floating islands with unique pals to obtain and more too. And the game has also gotten fresh new side quests to do as well, just littered all over the map too. Mutations, that's a new feature, is a mechanic where when you breed your pals, you can sometimes get stronger versions of the same pal. So that also adds new layers to how you want to go about optimizing and min-maxing your team, which is, yes, very similar to how Pokemon does breeding too, but still they have that as well. The level cap has also been raised from 65 to 80, and pretty much all in all, Palworld 1.0 is pretty much the best time for anybody on the fence to finally jump in. The wild part is how much the game costs too. I said this in another video, but it bears repeating, Palworld is not a fully priced video game somehow. On Canadian PSN for me, as you can see there, Palworld is $39 regular, but it's $27 on sale right now as of this video being made anyways. So if you're watching this in the future, I can't say if that sale will be there still or not, obviously, but either way, that this game is not a fully priced video game. It still has more content than a lot of games that are double its price and then some. Palworld has an end game. It has actual multiplayer that isn't surface level like Pokemon, and all of it is for half the price or so of a mainline Pokemon game. So the question then remains, how does Nintendo respond to all this? Objectively speaking, this means that Nintendo has to lock in a lot. I mean, sure, yeah, Pokemon Wind and Waves is going to sell gangbusters out of the gate, no matter what Nintendo or Palworld does. People are going to swarm that game like World War Z zombies regardless of its quality, but that's the problem. Pokemon has been lazy for a really long time now. I will admit, Nintendo has at least cracked the code from developing Pokemon games at a very, steep discount of budget-wise compared to other AAA developers, so kudos to them. A Pokemon game's budget is but a mere fraction of, say, a Sony or an Xbox first-party game, yet despite that, Pokemon's return on investment is something that Sony nor Xbox could ever hope to match, because it's, well, frankly impossible to do. Pokemon just has the world in its vice grips. That being said though, when your major competitor is not only on every platform that you're not on, but is also half your price, you should be shaking in your boots, because it means that anything Nintendo tries to get away with now is going to be met with scrutiny and deserved fan backlash too. I mean, go look at the Mega Dimension DLC for Legend ZA here on the Canadian Nintendo eShop, right? It's $40. It costs more to buy this expansion than it does to get Palworld right now on Steam, and you can't even play this DLC without the base game as well. Which also in Canada is seen here, Pokemon Legend ZA Nintendo Switch 2 version is $100 Canadian before tax. So you're going to need to spend $140 Canadian before tax to get the full Legend ZA experience on the Switch 2. You could buy Palworld 3 times over and still have money left compared to what you need to just spend on the newest Pokemon game, and that's the point. It's not that Pokemon games are bad, they're just not really worth the money that you spend on them. The other reason why I give so much flack to Pokemon over, say, other Nintendo first-party games is because while sure they're all games meant for, in a sense for kids, they are, Pokemon especially is targeted at children even more so than, say, Zelda or Mario. So these predatory prices are kind of insane for a game series that wants kids to play them, because each game costs so much money to buy. Seriously, again, $100 for Legend ZA. Look, I reviewed the game on the channel, so I did buy it for that reason, but if I wasn't reviewing Legend ZA, I would not have paid the price that Nintendo asked of me, because it's just unreasonable, man. The game costs more than GTA 6 will at launch for me. Make it make sense. You can't, but that's the truth here. See, before with Pokemon, I didn't really mind, because as seen here from Google, when Pokemon Diamond came out, it was $30 American, which was around $40 Canadian, give or take. Either way, that's not a lot for a game like Pokemon Diamond, right? The price you paid back then felt proportional to the game that you were getting. And this is why for so long, Pokemon kind of got away with having less graphical fidelity, or say quality even, over their competitors. Because sure, those games weren't very big or looked the best, but they were a lot cheaper, so it was fine, and the price actually reflected that. But as time went on, those games have only gotten more expensive. Again, imagine telling your younger self when you bought Pokemon Diamond on release like I did, that there would be a DLC for a future Pokemon game that was the same base price as a new game with nowhere near the amount of new content, yet it cost the same anyways. This is why I'm such a hater on Pokemon, because I love the series so much. I hate on it because I want it to be better. My anger doesn't come from some malicious place, okay? I don't want to see them fail. It's more like a parent watching their kid not achieve what they could be able to do. Like, just get up already. Why are you being so lazy, Nintendo? What do you mean your latest Pokemon game, if I wanted the full experience, is 3 times the price of Pokemon Diamond? That's unreasonable. It's why Palworld's such a threat, because the game has DLC, just like Pokemon does, but because Palworld is in a sense indie, kind of, I mean, well, it started off indie, that is true. Now it's turned Pocket Pair into like a powerhouse, man, but the point still stands that if it is still classified as indie, but this indie game has DLC that is, by the way, entirely free, right? Full mini expansions created that don't cost the user more money to play when they buy the game. They don't need to spend entire game prices for the DLC either. My fear, however, is that Pocket Pair might get greedy in the future, and a inevitable Palworld 2 release will be far more expensive while offering less. But I think Pocket Pair is smart enough to know they need to stay firmly in the middle of what Nintendo is doing right now to win. They need to essentially undercut Nintendo at every given possibility to maintain their momentum. I would wager the next Palworld game will be maybe $50 USD max, but will likely have more content than, say, Wind and Waves in comparison. Nintendo fans may not like that, but it's probably going to happen. Look, I like Pokemon too, but we gotta be real. Nintendo, they have been sleepwalking that IP for years now. But according to Pocket Pair, all of this is only the beginning. This is from GameIndustry.biz. We're going to see more hit games coming from publishers you've never heard of. So John Buckley, the head of publishing and communications at Pocket Pair, said that big publishers need to get with the times, as he says here. The terms they offer and the way they structure their deals have increasingly become irrelevant to what the industry is today. And he's right. The problem is that a lot of AAA publishers these days, demands are just kind of unreasonable and also unrealistic. They want safe, tried and true, surefire hits, but the reality is a lot of what AAA does these days is sort of the antithesis of what people actually want to play. They want their games to be live service slop that pushes you to inject your credit card constantly to progress, and if it is a single player game, they're still going to have item shops like Black Flag Resynced has, or they don't even trust you to figure out anything on your own. In the case of, for example, every Sony first party game ever, with their characters always talking 24/7. John Buckley had more to say though. No one wants to sign 100% recoup revenue clauses until publishers break even anymore. That's gaming 10 years ago. It's just that some of the legacy publishers have brand recognition and the luxury to turn developers down, since their name recognition will still leave someone willing to sign for them, he continued. It's why I think a lot more indie developers with success are starting to think, hey, we can do this ourselves, we'll publish, and we'll offer more favorable terms, and we won't do recoup clauses. A lot more companies are doing it because it's a lot more sustainable than people realize. In case you don't know what a recoup clause is, basically it's an agreement that many AAA publishers do even to this day when it comes to creating video games. And it's how they get development studios to work on their IP. So what usually happens is, let's say you're a studio making a game like, I don't know, Spider-Man, for example, right? Let's just use that for an example. Typically what happens is that the company who owns the IP, Marvel Disney in this case, would pay your team to make the game. They would cover your salary, stuff like quality assurance testers, marketing, etc., etc. Everything is paid for because it's their IP that you're working on. Once the game is done and it comes out, that's when this 100% recoup model then kicks in. This is also the most common practice of this, which means when the game comes out, the publisher of Spider-Man in this example will get 100% of all of the money made from the sales right out of the gate in order to pay back the money they spent on your team making the game. And only until their total investment is paid off does your studio then start to make money from the game that you just developed. But since the vast majority of the good money, so to speak, as in first week of sales or whatever, where, you know, they're obviously being sold at the highest amount that they can be, that goes to the publisher. So you likely don't then make as much despite having spent years, you know, making the game in the first place. It's the same thing with Baldur's Gate 3 and Larian. It's a big reason why Larian did not want to make Baldur's Gate 4, because a lot of the money made on Baldur's Gate 4 likely went straight to Wizards of the Coast, and then Larian got money later on once BG3 was probably cheaper to buy. So they spent all this time making this amazing game in Baldur's Gate 3, but they didn't get to reap the benefits, so to speak, in a similar way because obviously they didn't own the rights to the IP, which is exactly why Larian Studios is now doing the Divinity games, because Larian owns Divinity, obviously. So when that game comes out, they don't have to really split anything in any way. They keep everything. Well, they split it in terms of like the, you know, the platform they're on, like PlayStation and Steam or whatever, which you really can't escape that unless you have your own like platform, which, you know, many obviously don't for obvious reasons. But the fact still remains that that's why Larian, for example, is not making Baldur's Gate 3, right? They would make less money than if they made Divinity. That's the point. That's kind of what Buckley's talking about. And the reason that this is done is because in these clauses, usually it's legally stated that the developer does not pay the difference of loss if that game doesn't do well enough either. And the publisher will simply absorb the loss and then move on, and they will likely sever that partnership as well. So what Buckley is saying is that this way of making games is obviously in the publishers of AAA games' favor, like Wizards of the Coast, Spider-Man, Marvel, whatever. But the development studios are then the ones getting shafted because obviously none of this is in their favor. But this is why indie developers like a Pocket Pair with Palworld are seen as a shining ray of light in the AAA, or I guess AA publishing space, because they're not doing it in a way that a Marvel, Disney, or Wizards of the Coast or whoever is doing it. They're instead offering flexibility and not screwing over developers like the big guys usually do. Essentially having these smaller publishers like a Pocket Pair who can then find sources of investment outside of AAA to make their games is what Buckley and Pocket Pair with games like Palworld are believers of, and they think that is the future of gaming, which honestly I agree with them. Buckley said more, I think we're going to see more hit games coming from publishers you never heard of, more indie games getting funding through incubators and public funds rather than publishers. The future of the modern publisher is just a marketing agency offering platform support but not necessarily developer support. Massive legacy publishers may move towards AA scale games, but for others, this is where it's going. Honestly, what Buckley is saying, it sounds good to me, right? The last thing we need is more games that take 7 years to make that cost $400 million. And all they end up doing is bankrupting studios and leading to mass layoffs because nothing is sustainable. The reason why before you used to get games on routinely release schedules was also because developers didn't care as much about graphics compared to just making fun games. A great example of this is go look at Naughty Dog, right? You got Uncharted 1, 2, and 3, all in the span of 2 years of each other. I'm not even lying. Uncharted 1, 2007, Uncharted 2, 2009, Uncharted 3, 2011. Now Naughty Dog can't release a single game in the entire PS5 generation because all that matters now, apparently, is graphics and huge budgets over just making fun games. And then will something like Intergalactic even make as much money as, say, the entire Uncharted trilogy despite taking longer to develop? I doubt it. But that's the point here, right? Palworld is essentially the blueprint of a true AA release working as intended. The game didn't cost an arm and a leg to make. Palworld's development costs were apparently somewhere near $7 million, which in video game terms, that's small compared to the usual 200 million plus range that most AAA games work within. Palworld, as 80level.com showed back in 2024 when it first released, within 3 months or so of Palworld coming out, it went on to make somewhere near $500 million in revenue. So the return on investment was crazy. But that's the point. I think too many games are worried about needing ballooning budgets and that publishers help in order to crutch themselves, to angle themselves for like success, I guess. But the reality is the future of game development is not these overzealous expensive games. Palworld, and to a degree, Pokemon even, they prove this. Pokemon games have notoriously smaller budgets, yet their ROI is nuts. Pokemon Legends ZA's budget, as Kid Guru showed here, via a leak at Nintendo, it turned out to just be $13 million. Yet the game went on to sell well past 5 million copies in its first week at a full price point of $80 to 100 Canadian per copy sold. And remember, Nintendo doesn't have to share any of that because it's their platform, they own Game Freak, and they own the IP with Pokemon. So Nintendo made off like bandits with this latest game. Well, really all Pokemon games, they make off like bandits. Unironically, how Nintendo makes their games is also kind of the blueprint for modern AAA that a lot of them aren't doing. Sure, yes, I do agree. Pokemon games in general do feel pretty lazy, but the point of the matter is that their return on investment proves that bigger budgets don't necessarily mean better performing games. Palworld was made effectively for half of Legends ZA. Yet looking at those team numbers alone, Pocket Pair is raking in the millions en masse for a reason, because people want to play games that are fun. And it's actually not bad how good the game's graphics look or how many pimples you can see on some guy's face with all of your rendering or whatever. Some of the best games of all time, pretty much most of them, have stylized looks for a reason. Minecraft, Roblox, Pokemon, it doesn't matter, because they're not only easier to develop, but their art styles also, and this is key, allow them to look timeless over time. I would argue that the more realistic your game ends up looking, the more dated in due time it will also become. Again, personally, I would rather Naughty Dog go back to making games like Uncharted faster because they were fun to play, than spending the time that they are making, which is forever, to make one single game with Intergalactic. If the games industry leaned more towards what Palworld was doing over, say, Call of Duty, maybe there wouldn't be as many layoffs and there'd be more room for actual creativity and fun games to be made. After all, Pokemon's mere existence proves that people don't care about graphics. They care about having fun. Really, all of Nintendo's games do. All of them have like amazing art styles, right? If you put them on the PlayStation or whatever, objectively speaking, even Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom doesn't look, I guess, graphically as impressive as, say, Call of Duty or God of War Ragnarok or whatever. But then you look at the sales of those games, and like the Zelda, like Tears of the Kingdom sold over like 22 million copies or something already. Do you think people really cared that it didn't have super realistic graphics that you could see every pore on Link's face? No, they don't care. And the same goes with Pokemon, which is still fun, even if it does feel lazy at times. You can't deny that the games still do have their core gameplay loops intact. But the fact that Sony or Xbox would rather spend hundreds of millions of dollars while Nintendo spends a few but makes more is the problem. Gears of War E-Day is apparently like $300 million to develop. It's not going to sell anywhere near what Legends ZA did. And I would love for more Palworlds. I don't mean just more monster capturing games. I just mean games that have similar budgets that focus on fun and creativity over look how many lines are on this guy's forehead or something. Like, isn't that amazing? Honestly, not really, no. For example, Pocket Pair published the game Windrose. Remember that survival pirate crafting game that was sort of like Black Flag, which is seen here in April this year? It sold over 1 million copies right out of the gate and had somewhere near 200,000 plus players on Steam at one point. The game was a success. Its developers, by the way, they're situated in Uzbekistan, which shows that the future of games aren't even necessarily just wildly expensive Western-made ones. Windrose, like Palworld, became a major success because they prioritized fun over profits. And then Windrose is seen here again from PC Gamer in May this year. It sold over 2 million copies then. It's just going to keep selling because it's not a fully priced video game. It didn't cost $300 million to create, and it's not overtly monetized or worried about live service elements like so many other games are. It's sort of becoming the blueprint, really. Palworld, Windrose, whatever. Just make a cool game in a niche that is not being serviced enough by others, and you're probably likely going to succeed. Nintendo has famously ignored everyone outside of their own platform. I mean, cool, but that's why Palworld sold millions then. If Nintendo released Pokemon outside of their ecosystem, yeah, they would be making even more billions, but I guess they don't want to. So naturally then, someone had to step in to fill that void, that niche, like I said. Despite Nintendo Nintendo trying to sue Palworld, which didn't work, and now they're drowning in money. As Buckley said in terms of how Pocket Pair does their publishing compared to AAA development as seen here, Buckley says this is because the contract varies depending on how much support the publisher will be required to offer, although he notes that generally, the deal involves around a 30 to 40% recoup rate without Pocket Pair taking ownership of the IP. That's huge, alongside clauses such as the ability to part ways amicably if the partnership isn't working. So imagine you're an indie developer and your two options are: one, a AAA publisher who will take 100% of profits until their investment is paid off, and likely they're also going to own your IP, or two, you go with someone like Pocket Pair who will take 30 to 40% of your investment and you get 60 to 70% of your sales overall right out of the gate. And you get to own your IP, so if it does well, you have more leeway to get better publishing rights in the future and make future games in that series. You would be a moron to go with AAA at that point, like a total sucker even. No wonder this is leading to success stories like this. As Buckley says here, in terms of other games they worked with, like Trunkful, they also do localization in-house for games that they work with and QA in places like Japan and China. Because Pocket Pair, in case you don't know, is a Japanese company first, but despite that, they are still 99% hands-off compared to other publishers, who will instead micromanage everything that they invest in instead and buy the IP so no one can touch them pretty much afterwards. Like, the future is bright for Palworld though, as Buckley said here. We always intended to create Palworld and develop it for a while, but the idea that Palworld would become this IP that we would be making spin-offs for, that all came post-launch, says Buckley. We had to though, we'd be fools to put this game aside, wouldn't we? So we should at least try and continue it. So far, Palworld is getting a farming spin-off called Pal Farm, and they're also doing a trading card game to rival Pokemon with Bushiroad. They also signed a deal with Sony Music and Aniplex, which I would assume, maybe, is to eventually to make some sort of anime version or TV show of Palworld as well. I'm guessing. I don't know though. The point here is that Nintendo's hubris and inability to respect their fans when it came to Pokemon led to the direct completion and creation of arguably their biggest rival in the space. Yet that's because Nintendo became lazy and greedy with Pokemon. But the real threat is when you look at the raw numbers. Games Radar, as they reported here, that now since Palworld is launched, they have 8 million more players than Pokemon did with Red, Blue, and Green. Players, not copies sold, I know. But those numbers came before the launch of 1.0, and I already know some Pokemon fans will say, so what? Palworld beat a game released in the 90s. What's the big deal? You could look at it that way, but the point remains that Palworld's first release taken in context is very successful either way. And granted, by today's standards, most Pokemon games usually sell around the 30 to 40 million mark per release. So Palworld is, they're encroaching on their territory at least, and that is a problem. But by February 2025, Palworld also broke 32 million players. Although again, that is not copies sold, so that is a gotcha for Nintendo fans if they want to use it. But even back in January 2024 as seen here, Palworld then hit 19 million players, with 12 million of those being paid copies sold and the other 7 from subscription services like Game Pass. Either way, the fact that Palworld is hitting these numbers is great. It doesn't diminish Pokemon's legitimacy or anything, but it's still a very successful debut either way, and that's the point here. Ultimately, Palworld's existence is still crazy to think that after all these years, Pokemon finally has some solid competition. But I think the core win here is that AA games are proving that they can be just as successful as the AAA ones, and we do need more of that these days. There's too many games these days getting made that involve thousands of developers with support studios strewn across continents to make these things work. Looking at you, Ubisoft. And we have games with marketing campaigns that dwarf the development budget of classics from 15 years ago. Again, looking at you, Ubisoft, with Star Wars Outlaws, by the way. Everything has become too big and expensive, but it's also made things much slower too, right? Any publisher who's convinced themselves that this was progress is lying to keep pushing this unaffordable reality. Palworld was made by 30 developers or so when it first released. That shows you don't actually need 1,000 developers around the continent to make games. And I think there's another thing here many people in AAA are realizing the hard way. When it comes to Palworld, all their money spent on marketing matters little if you can get the internet to just do the talking and marketing for you. Palworld's marketing campaign was practically non-existent. It just grew through word of mouth, and the game marketed itself because players genuinely wanted to show other people what they were finding organically in the game. Unlike, say, Mixtape, which needed the entire industry to push it up a hill, Palworld didn't need any advertising to manufacture authentic excitement. It just happened naturally. That's awesome. And the question Nintendo keeps coming back to is, why this one? Why did Palworld resonate so strongly? And I think it's because people have spent years watching AAA, become cautious, and kept creating focus-tested games that felt designed by committee almost. Palworld is instead messy, experimental, and that's kind of its biggest strength, and that's exactly why Palworld created so much discussion the way that it did. Not because everybody suddenly believed that it would replace Pokemon, it won't, but because it showed that there was enormous demand for something new, finally, for once. And we're seeing this happen happened time and time again. Baldur's Gate 3, Stardew Valley, Valheim, Among Us, Vampire Survivors, Clair Obscur Expedition 33, Windrose, Mecha Chameleon, Escape from Duck-Off, Schedule 1. I'm sure I'm missing something, but when it comes to independent games, but that's what this all comes down to. The games industry is no longer needing to just be Call of Duty and stuff like that. Maybe I'll get into how that stuff is also a problem in a future video, but we need more stuff that isn't $80 that release with expensive expansion passes. We just need fun games because fun is where freedom really shines. The feeling that a developer had fun making the thing that you're playing instead of another game made that feels like it was just made to fill a spreadsheet. But regardless of what happens next, Palworld already accomplished something important. It challenged the assumptions, and it proved that a smaller developer could create a global phenomenon with almost zero backing. It also proved that players are going to be able to embrace unexpected ideas if they're cool, and it forced the industry to look in the mirror for once, thank God. And the biggest question of all here for me, and let me know what you think as always, isn't how did Palworld become so successful? No. The question we should be asking is, why was the industry so surprised that people wanted something different? As always, thanks for watching. Subscribe if you'd like to. I hope we get more Palworld-like games in the future in other niches. Maybe one day a game will rival GTA even, but from an indie level. That would be cool. Or Call of Duty maybe. Anything is really possible now, so go and enjoy some games.